In the scorching heat of the summer of 1954, among the desolate hills of Robbers Cave State Park in southeastern Oklahoma, as 22 11-year-old boys left their families to attend camps, they were unaware of how the 3 weeks ahead would change their lives, steal their innocence, how they would begin to see their best friends as enemies, how they would inflict violence upon one another, how the hatred within them would be fueled, and how that hatred would be extinguished. Because this was no ordinary summer camp. This was one of the boldest, most controversial, and perhaps most important experiments in the history of social psychology, and its architect, Muzaffer Sherif, a social psychologist of Turkish origin, was seeking an answer to perhaps the most disturbing, urgent, and universal question of human nature. Is intergroup hatred, hostility, and conflict innate, or do social conditions create it? Is racism a gene or a learned behavior? Are wars inevitable or preventable? And most importantly, if hatred can be created, can it be destroyed? These questions were not merely academic curiosity, for in 1954, the world was still trying to heal the wounds of the Second World War. The Cold War was escalating, racism reigned in every corner of America, and Sherif knew that if we could understand the roots of intergroup conflict, perhaps we could find ways to prevent it. But for this, an experiment was required, a bold, radical, perhaps ethically boundary-pushing experiment, and Robbers Cave was exactly that. Sherif had made his selection very carefully. The children were divided into two groups, 11 in the Eagles group, 11 in the Rattlers group. But the truth was this. During the first week, these two groups would be unaware of each other's existence, staying in different parts of the camp, doing different activities, and bonding within themselves, because Sherif knew that without a strong group identity being formed, without a strong sense of us being established, hatred against them could not form, first belonging, then hostility. The first week of the experiment began on June 19th. 1954, and proceeded in a completely innocent, even fascinating manner. The Eagles group was placed in the northern section of the campground, the Rattlers in the southern section. There were miles of distance, dense forest, and hills between them. Both groups were occupied with classic camp activities: hiking, swimming, canoeing, fishing, telling stories around the campfire, roasting marshmallows. This was the perfect summer camp of 11-year-old boys' dreams. Day 3. The children have started to form sincere bonds, giving nicknames, helping each other. On the 4th day, the Eagles group made their own flag. On the 5th day, the Rattlers group wrote their own anthem and began singing it in chorus every morning. On the 6th day, the Eagles built a hut, worked together, sweated, and hugged each other when they finished. On the 7th day, the last day of the first week, Sherif wrote in his notes, "Group identities are fully established. The children have started saying, 'We are Eagles. We are Rattlers.' Group affiliations are very strong. They are loyal to each other, helpful, cooperative. Now it is time to move to the second stage." And he would later admit that his hand trembled and his conscience spoke to him while writing those lines, because he knew what followed would not be easy at all. He would intentionally drive innocent children into conflict and walk a fine line between scientific curiosity and ethical responsibility. On the first day of the second week, the morning of June 26th, the researchers told the Eagles group, "There is another group of boys on the other side of the camp, did you know?" And the expression on the children's faces changed. Curiosity, surprise, and a bit of a competitive glint. "Can we meet them?" they asked, and the researchers said, "Yes, but first we will organize a tournament. Competitions like baseball, tug of war, treasure hunt, and the winning group will receive a trophy and medals." The same information was given to the Rattlers group on the same day, and their reaction was similar. June 27th, the first baseball game. The two groups came face to face for the first time, and initially everything seemed normal. They shook hands, said good luck, and took their positions. But as the game progressed, the cheering began to rise. "Come on, Eagles! Crush them, Rattlers!" And the cheering became increasingly aggressive. "Eagles are stupid! Rattlers are cowards!" Objections to the referee's decisions began. Shouts of "This is unfair" rose up. The Eagles won the match, and their celebrations were a bit excessive. And that night at dinner, when the two groups sat at separate tables, the tension between them was palpable. Glances were hostile. Whispers were full of insults. The second day of competition was worse. The Rattlers won the tug-of-war match and stole the Eagles' flag and took it to their cabin. This symbolic attack was a declaration of war for the Eagles. That night, the Eagles group gathered, held a strategic meeting, and made plans for revenge. "Tomorrow we will burn their flag. We will show them who is stronger." And indeed, the next morning, the Eagles raided the Rattlers' cabin, stole the flag, burned it in a trash can, and scattered the ashes at the Rattlers' door. When the Rattlers learned of this, the anger, hatred, and desire for revenge on the children's faces were of a magnitude that could no longer be explained by innocence. These 11-year-old children were shouting, "We will kill them," and wanted to resort to violence. The researchers panicked. Questions like, "The situation is getting out of control. Should we intervene?" began to circulate in the notes. But Sheriff said, "No, let's observe. This is human nature. This is reality," and did not intervene. The Rattlers organized a night raid on the Eagles' mess hall in retaliation, overturned tables, scattered food on the floor, and smeared the walls with mud. The next morning, when the Eagles saw this, the reaction was violent. They found the Rattlers. The event turned into physical violence, and only at that point did the researchers intervene and separate the groups, but it was too late. Hatred had taken root. On the 9th day, Sheriff made a bold decision. It was time to move to the third stage of the experiment, peace building. Because simply creating conflict and leaving it there would be ethically unacceptable, as well as scientifically incomplete. The real question was if hatred can be created, can it also be destroyed? And if so, how? Sheriff's hypothesis was this: bringing groups together, providing contact, giving information is not enough. Preaching, giving moral lessons, saying we are all human is not enough. Even common activities are not enough. The only solution, superordinate goals, that is, common problems where both groups are forced to cooperate in order to survive or succeed. This was the concept he called superordinate goals, and he began to test it. First, he forced the two groups to eat in the same mess hall, but the result was a fiasco. The children threw food at each other, insulted each other, and fights broke out. Second, he had them watch a movie together, but again it failed. The groups gathered in separate corners and threw verbal jabs at each other throughout the movie. But then he put his main plan into action. On the morning of the 10th day, the camp management, consisting of researchers, gave terrible news. The camp's water tank has broken down, water is not coming, and everyone's help is needed to fix it, or everyone will go thirsty.
This was a real crisis, and the children faced a common threat for the first time. No longer Eagles versus Rattlers, but everyone versus thirst. Initially, the groups tried to work separately, but the water tank was so far away, the repairs so difficult, the task so large that they realized they could not succeed alone.
One of the Eagles said, "Maybe we can work with the Rattlers just for this job," and the others reluctantly agreed. A similar suggestion came from the Rattlers, and in that moment, for the first time in history, the two groups began to work side by side. But Sheriff wrote something remarkable in his notes. When the water came, the celebrations were still group-based, meaning Eagles celebrated among themselves, Rattlers among themselves. They work together but still have separate identities. A crisis alone was not enough. We must continue. Day 11, second crisis. The camp truck broke down, which the researchers sabotaged, of course. It was necessary to start the truck to get food, or everyone would go hungry that night. This time, the children organized faster. Intergroup communication was more natural. They tried to start the truck by pushing it together. 1, 2, 3, push. And two children, one Eagle and one Rattler, were pushing shoulder to shoulder, sweating, focusing on the same goal. The truck started, they went to town, bought food, and on the way back something changed. They started singing together on the bus. no longer the eagle's song or the rattler's anthem, but a camp song everyone knew together in harmony. On the 12th day, the third crisis, the camp budget has run out. There is not enough money for the special meal consisting of steak and French fries, the children's favorite, planned for the last night. The children were offered two options. Either everyone would give from their own money or they would eat the cheaper meal. The children discussed, calculated, and decided everyone would give an equal amount, they would eat the special meal, and while this decision was being made, the question was no longer how much will the eagles give, how much will the rattlers give, but how much will we all give? Group identities were not melting, a new identity was being born, the camp kids' identity. The last day of the experiment, the children were to board the bus to go home, and the researcher wondered, would the groups want to ride in separate buses? No, they all boarded the same bus together, and throughout the journey, they sang songs together, told stories. Some said, "Let's come again next summer, all together." Sharif wrote his final note as follows: 14 days ago, 22 children who did not know each other arrived. 7 days later, they became two enemy groups, hated, used violence, but in the last 7 days, thanks to common goals, cooperation, and shared challenges, they united again. Hatred can be created, but it can also be destroyed. Human nature is flexible. Conditions are determinate. The system can be changed. The findings of the Robbers Cave experiment revolutionized social psychology by proving that intergroup hostility stems from competition for scarce resources rather than innate aggression, inspiring real-world solutions from the European Union to global peace agreements. Although the study faced severe ethical criticisms for intentionally driving children into conflict and methodological questions regarding its small sample size, its core message remains undeniable. Today, in a world struggling with polarization and global crises, Sheriff's lesson is more urgent than ever. Just as 11-year-old boys learned to hate each other in 8 days but reunited through common goals in 7, humanity too can overcome its deepest divisions. Because if hatred can be created, so can love. And with that, this is where our video ends. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and until the next video, stay curious.